Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cindy Arnson, the director of the Latin American program at the Wilson Center, and I'm delighted today to be joining with my colleagues in the Brazil Institute and in the Environmental Change and Security program to bring you this really unique program focusing on the role of Latin America's private sector in environmental preservation and sustainability. For a number of years now, even decades, private sector companies have put the issues of environment, social responsibility, and governance principles, ESG, the so-called triple bottom line, at the core of their operations, which previously were mostly focused or defined by a search for profitability. And this change has been motivated by a number of factors. There is shareholder pressure to address environmental issues. There are the market preferences of a younger generation of not only investors, but consumers. There is sensitivity to public opinion. And let's not forget the values of a company's own leadership. And on the environmental front, there are multiple issues, from the use of water to energy consumption. There are social issues involving how companies interact with the communities that they serve or where their operations are based, and also governance issues, which include codes of corporate ethics as well as transparency. And what's especially notable, I think, and that will come out in a moment, is that companies are not only talking about what they are doing in the space of ESG, but also use external auditors and evaluators to assess their performance across a range of indicators. So I'd like to welcome and introduce today's panelists in the order in which they'll speak. First, we'll hear from Marcelo Furtado from Brazil, who was a member of the Sustainability Committee of Marfrig Global Foods, which is the second largest producer of beef in the world. He's also the chief sustainability officer and a partner at a company called Z-Score, which helps, which is a traceability platform using blockchain to look at environmental assets. And I think most relevant to today's discussion is that Marcelo used to be the head of the Greenpeace office in Brazil from 2018 to 2013, and for 15 years before that worked for Greenpeace International as an advisor on climate and energy and industrial pollution. Next, we'll hear from Rosa Maria de Frade, who is the Director of Corporate Affairs at the Central American Bottling Company, CBC. She is the president of the Guatemala chapter of the UN Global Compact, which is a corporate sustainability issue that focuses on issues of human rights, labor rights, environmental protection, transparency, and more broadly, the fight against corruption. Rosa Maria is a former member of the Guatemalan Congress and was the sponsor of laws on access to information and also laws on femicide and other issues related to gender-based violence. Woods Staton is the executive chairman of Arcos Dorados, which is the largest franchise in the world of McDonald's. He's also the board chair of the Ronald McDonald House, the charity in Latin America, which supports the families of those with pediatric cancer. He is a co-sponsor of Endeavor Argentina, which is an organization that promotes and sponsors entrepreneurship. And he's also a passionate champion of youth employment and skills training, especially for disadvantaged youth in the countries in which Arcos Dorados has operations. He is also the chair of the board of the advisory board of the Latin American program. And Alejandro Calderon a native of Colombia, is the founder of Mutual Empathy, and I'll let him describe what that is, because I'm still not sure exactly the combination of networking and venture capital that it involves. And prior to that, he worked in the financial sector at JP Morgan and at Morgan Stanley in Paris, Geneva, London, and New York. And Alejandro and I actually first met at an IDB conference in Cartagena, Colombia, years ago, when he was working as part of the Green Bonds division of Morgan Stanley. He's also one of the most imaginative people that I know, and works on a number of projects that have environmental sustainability at their core, from initiatives in Colombia to turn municipal waste into biofuels, to projects on blended finance and ecotourism and serious games and sustainable fashion. So we have an excellent panel to address these questions. And I'm now going to ask Marcelo to please unmute, and the floor is yours. I'd also like to mention to those in the audience, if you'd like to send a question to one or more members of the panel, please send a tweet to the Twitter account of the Latin American program, which is at LATAMPROG, LATAMPROG, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. Thank you, Marcelo. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and good afternoon to everyone, and particularly good afternoon to my panel colleagues. Thank you very much for the Wilson Center for this invitation. I think to describe a little bit about my opinion about the role of the private sector in Latin America, I would like to give first a more global context. We are now at a point on our struggle to face the climate crisis where we have two options only. We move by purpose or we move by pain. And if we don't move, then we're part of greenwash. So considering that any person that understands what's going on with this pandemic and understood the relevance of our role, taking better care about ourselves and our planet, the choice of moving by purpose or by pain is not only a moral and ethical choice, but it's also an economic choice. And if you look at the political scene, and I think the US is a very good example of that, of how things are changing so fast with the political change in the country. And we see the Europeans with the Green Deal, and we see the upcoming German elections with the Green Party on a well-positioned leadership in an interesting race, because even if Merkel makes her successor, Germany will continue on the leading seat of climate in Europe. The future indicates that the green economy is where we're aiming and where we're going. So I think the big question for the private sector is, if you do not have a future readiness for this green economy, or if you as a company are not understanding that important signal, you will be out of the game. And then coming down to Latin America, if we look at what is our greatest contribution among many that we have, I will use one example that I think is very related to the operations of Marfrig, which is the Amazon. The truth is, with no Amazon, there will be no success facing the climate crisis and staying below 2 degrees, hopefully at 1.5. Therefore, operations that happen in the Amazon, not only they have to explain and demonstrate how they are related to an operation that do not foster deforestation, but at this point, they should also encourage a positive impact, meaning inclusion of illegal operations in the region, as well as recovery of degraded land and deforested land. So I think that the importance of an operation like the one that Marfrig does, being the second largest meat company in the world, and the number one hamburger producer in the planet, is you have to understand what is your core in the sense of where this challenge lands. And I think that the challenge for any protein company now, similarly to I think what happened to the oil companies, is that you need to look into the future and understanding the trends that younger generation will most likely eat less meat, and that the world will be much more demanding in terms of the environmental impact and footprint of commodities like beef. First of all, is positioning your company as a protein company and not a beef company. The second is diversifying your portfolio, looking at vegetable protein and vegetable-based meat, which is the case of Marfrig with the Plant Plus acquisition and joint venture with ADM. The third one is looking into the future with all the technology changes and so on, is to see itself maybe much more as a food company than a beef protein company. So all these changes puts a major challenge to any corporation, but particularly to corporations that are Latin American based, and however, with operations overseas, in this case, with a big operation in the US as well, with National Beef, and answering the question about, well, the world is going towards a green economy, therefore my company needs to go towards a green economy. When I met Marcos Molina, the founder of Marfrig, and I was the CEO of Greenpeace in Brazil, we were actually denouncing Marfrig for deforestation, and the conversation was either you get your act together or we will name and shame your company for being part of the problem. And his reaction at the time was, okay, what do we need to do to get the set right? And the answer was, well, not only you need to implement zero deforestation linked to your business, but also make a commitment that you will have food traceability. So the first part of that exercise happened with the direct suppliers. However, this industry has another pathway for sourcing beef, which is the indirect suppliers. And that's a much more complex network because you have a long pathway of the cattle moving from one place to another before it gets to the Marfrig gates. And I have to say that I think not only Marfrig, but the other companies also, they kind of got accommodated to having fixed the problem with the direct suppliers and not going so fast and so deep on the solution for the indirect ones. And then came pressure from society, from consumers, and from investors saying, you need to go all the way. We can't only accept a half solution. We need to give the full solution. And I think that call for action, particularly with this ESG, Cindy, that you mentioned, wave, coming on board and putting much more pressure on companies, provoked companies to be more ambitious and to work faster and bolder on bringing these solutions on board. So today, interesting enough, all the largest beef producers in Brazil, the three biggest companies, they all have climate targets. They all have commitments for food traceability, and they all have commitments for eradication of deforestation from their chain of custody. However, a year ago, just July last year, Marfrig was the only company that made that commitment. So if you look into what happened from 2009, when these companies were first denounced, they worked working on delivering the first pathway of direct suppliers, and then did not work on the indirect suppliers. And then came the second phase of addressing indirect suppliers. What happened in the last 12 months is almost equivalent to what happened in the last 12 years. And the pressure for that comes exactly from the points you brought on your opening remarks. It comes from the change in society's level of acceptance of what a company can and cannot do to seek their social license. Number two comes from a company having to respond to investors. And number three comes because of a company needing to understand and demonstrate their fitness and readiness with this new green economy that is coming up and becoming a reality, finally. So I would say that the simple fact that Molina assembled a sustainability committee that is composed of the largest shareholder, the CEO of the company, the sustainability director of the company, 2 board members, and 2 independent members, myself being one of them, is already a quite unique setting, at least here in Brazil, because sustainability committees that report to the board, we have quite a number of them around companies, but not necessarily with that gravitas, with that level of participation. And therefore, the meetings that this committee holds are not only meetings to discuss issues, are meetings to decide issues. And all the key decision makers are inside that meeting. So it's much easier for you to get things done. The second thing that was very attractive for me in terms of getting engaged with this is the fact that the company agreed to have full transparency. So reporting to the public what went well, what didn't went well, what they did not do, and if they didn't do it, why. The third part, and that happens, and in fact, just a month ago, there was a live event where the company was demonstrating their results, and this was put out to the public. And finally, there is a political situation, as everybody knows, in Brazil. I think we're now in Brazil in a very similar place where the US was in 2019, right? You have the wrong president at the wrong time when the world needs leadership and action on climate and climate justice. What is happening now is that the agribusiness in Brazil is being put in the corner and being divided. Part of the agribusiness, which I call the progressive side of the agribusiness, fully understood that unless you incorporate sustainability in your business, you have no future. But more than that, if you incorporate sustainability in your business, you will create a positive business environment in the country where you will show that conservation and profit can be reconciled. However, another part of the agribusiness, which I would say the outdated agribusiness, keeps relying on the idea that we should expand more, we need to clear cut the forest to make more profit, and not understanding that it's actually the Amazon rainforest that is your water pump. In fact, the agribusiness depends on the existence of that forest in order to produce water and electricity for the country, which, by the way, is the electricity that agribusiness uses also in its production. So because we had this divide, private sector was asked, Cindy, this last 12 months to become much more vocal and much more protagonist, but almost a certain type of activism towards sustainability and carbon neutrality in order to give a signal, not only to society, but also to investors, that independent of the political scene in the country, private sector understands that this is where they need to go. And I think the role of academia and civil society is to join forces with the parts of the private sector that understands and agree with that pathway, because unless we work together on this, our likelihood to succeed is very limited. So I hope this was a good enough opening remarks to just warm up the conversation. And I'm sure we'll have more time to cover additional issues that I failed to cover. But let me end just by saying that I'm an optimist by nature, but I think that while we're going through a very difficult time with the highest records of death and contamination of COVID, the highest records ever on deforestation in the Amazon rainforest, I actually see hope. And I actually see that the fact that we have a vibrant civil society, the fact that we have a stellar academic body in the country, and we have private sector engaged in making this transformation happen, shows that not only we have resistance, but in more than that, we have leadership to change this reality and to respond positively to what the world expects from us in the region, to not only keep the Amazon forest standing, but also to take advantage of the opportunities of a green economy. And in particularly for Brazil, use that as our biggest asset and not as a reason for the world to worry about it.
Marcelo, thank you. That was the perfect opening. I'd like to mention that the Brazil Institute at the Wilson Center has an alliance with a number of private sector actors as well as civil society organizations to work precisely on these questions of sustainability in the Amazon. So we look forward to ongoing conversation. Rosa Maria, if you could kindly unmute, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the Wilson Center for the invitation. Greetings to you, Cindy, and the participants in the webinar. It's a great honor to share this forum with you. First of all, I would like to start with briefly to share with you a briefly resume of our group. In the 1885, the Mariposa Group was founded in Guatemala by young entrepreneurs who started a great dream with a small beverage factory that evolved rapidly with technological incorporation and talent development. In 1942, CBC became the first PepsiCo bottler outside of the United States. In 1996, it began its international expansion and today has a presence in 16 countries. The group continues to evolve to become a multi-category company that includes not only beverage, but also food, Latin American flavors to the world. Speaking about sustainability, to achieve the vision of contributing to a better world, we integrate the efforts of total societal impact into the company's strategy and business model. We integrate the social, environmental, and governance dimensions, as you mentioned, Cindy, the ESGs, for the creation of shared value. We are enablers of the world growth and development of our employees, small entrepreneurs, and especially the small tienda de barrio and the small suppliers. We have a commitment with responsible environmental footprint, especially in the protection of water, research areas, reduction of greenhouse emissions, the integration of our bottles and packaging to the circular economy, renewable energy, and we are members of the Global Compact, and we report every year with the green standards in an advanced annual report. Speaking about the water stewardship, our actions are based in 3 pillars. The first of these is to ensure that all of our employees have access to water and sanitation in their communities. The second is to develop a management that allows us to progressively and constantly improve efficiency in the use of water, guaranteeing that we have the best wastewater treatment standards. And the third is our participation in collective actions initiatives that are aimed at improving water governance and the protection of recovery of water research areas, and especially in regions with water stress. I would like to speak about multidimensional poverty. index. This is the official measure promoted by UNDP and selected by many countries to report their progress on ESDGs, especially the first one that reduced the poverty and reduced by at least half of the proportion of the people living in multidimensional poverty. Oxford Poverty and Human Development Institute of the University of Oxford is the creator of the 4 multidimensional poverty indexes. Sophia of Oxford is the organization in charge of expanding the business in the business multidimensional poverty index through the global private sector. And this is very important for us because if we want to understand the problems that our employees are having to have access to water, to save water, we need to understand the environmental and the communities where they live, and we need to understand this multidimensional poverty that is not only associated with economic income. Companies can pay competitive salaries and even be within the highest ranges of the industry, but this does not guarantee that our employees and their families are not deprived. We made the decision to work with Sophia Foundation of the Oxford University in 2019 to carry out the multidimensional poverty measurement. In the result of the first evaluation process that we carry out in Guatemala, we realized that our employees suffered from deprivations that are associated with their environment, with the conditions of the communities in which they live. Likewise, it is important to take into account that in most cases, other members of their families, that this happened in many countries, in Latin American countries, such as parents and siblings are living with our employees because they have like extended families living with them in one home, and often in overcrowded conditions. When the living standards are analyzed in an integrated way, we realize that there is still an important gap to cover, especially in relation to decent housing, access to safe water and sanitation, quality in education and health for all members of their families. If we are speaking about the access to water, regarding the access to water and sanitation, 19% of the households do not have access to drinking water. Our employees have to buy or boil water to drink and to prepare food, and almost the same percentage do not have access to adequate sanitation system, and 13% do not have a solid waste collection and management system. So our commitment is to eradicate the multidimensional poverty of our employees and their families by 2025, facilitating access to water filters, sanitation infrastructure, but also developing a coordination process with local authorities and neighbors to work together with our volunteers to improve the community cooperation system. In order to eradicate the multidimensional poverty, we have formed 6 squads made up of volunteers led by directors and managers. Each squad is responsible for public-private partnership, resource mobilization, coordination with local authorities, and education and skills development program for employees and their families. If we are speaking about efficiency in the use of water, in 2020, we made a reduction of more than 5% in the indicator for liters that we use per liter of beverage that we produce. We aim to continue reducing this indicator, and our goal to 2025 is 1.4 liters of water used per 1 liter we produce of beverage. To achieve this goal, we have to take into consideration that in our mix, we have of beverage, we have high percentage of returnable glass. We established the highest standards of the reuse and discharge of treated water, which is in most cases exceed those established by local regulations. And I am going to mention 4 collective actions that we are working with, and we are founders also. We believe the multi-stakeholder collaboration can draw on significant expertise, capacities, and resources. That's why we participate in collective efforts to address water sustainability. In this opportunity, I want to mention 4 of them. And I would like to start talking about the Ecuador, the Quito Water Fund, in which we are founders. It is an alliance of people, institutions, and communities committed to the conservation and restoration of the water sources of the Metropolitan District of Quito in Ecuador. It has a net worth of $80 million, invest around $2 million annually in conservation projects, and almost 50,000 people have participated in training and in awareness campaigns on the efficient use of water and the protection of water. The second is the Regional Water Fund in Chira, Piura, Peru, that was created in 2015 to implement actions and projects for the conservation of ecosystems, as well as the development of a water culture that allows raising environmental awareness of the population in the use of the water resources. Resources management plan is managed by the technical secretariat that has the purpose to attract, manage, and drive resources to guarantee the quantity and the quality of water. The third is Guatemala Water Fund, which is a multi-sectoral platform whose objective is to promote the conservation, recovery, and sustainable use of water resources for the metropolitan region of Guatemala, having an initial goal to implement field actions in approximately 40,000 acres. Other companies in the food and beverage sector, construction, renewable energy, and other industrial sectors are participating in these initiatives. And in the case of Ecuador and Guatemala, we receive technical support from the National Conservancy and the Latin American Alliance of Water Funds. Finally, the protection of water sources also includes the adequate management of solid waste. For this reason, 4 years ago, we founded Atitlan recigla, an initiative made up of women leaders, environmental entrepreneurs, in which local authorities, indigenous leaders, international cooperation, and civil society organizations participate. We are convinced that only through multi-sectorial platforms we can reach an adequate level of water governance to achieve the goal of water security. Thank you very much.
Rosa Maria, thank you for that great presentation. Please make sure that we have a copy of the PowerPoint so that we can add that to the event page. Woods, if you are all unmuted, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi Cindy, and very nice to be here with all of you. We have a relationship with Marfrig, and I know Marcelo from that relationship, and I think that's what ESG and sustainability is all about. It's about having these relationships. We are at the consumer end of the business, and Marcelo and Marfrig are at the protein level of the business. So, we need each other. And I think that one of the most important things that we have to deal with is the constant fight between what is short-term and what is a long-term need. The short term always has, costs. It has development costs. It has the price that you have to pay for these things. And the long term is always see what we have to do to take care of this earth, right? And, interestingly enough, we've just come out of the pandemic, or we're coming out of the pandemic. I think in the US, you're coming out of it. We're still deeply in it in Latin America, unfortunately. But I think an interesting thing has been brought up by the Atitlan Trust Barometer. And it says basically that 70% of decisions of consumers are based on the trust that they have for companies. It's not the product, it's the trust they have in the company taking care of environmental and ESG issues. And 60 to 70% of people that have been interviewed say they look to companies to fix social problems that haven't been fixed by government. So all of a sudden, businesses are thrust into an area, in an arena where that was not their original idea. It was to make money, right? And so now you have an issue where, you have this idea that Milton Friedman, who said only shareholder, interest should be taken into account. Now we're looking at a bunch of other stakeholders, and that's what it's all about. And so the only thing I want to make sure that comes through is that it is very difficult to effect change. You know, there's a short term, always fighting against the long term. There's a lot of, if the chairman of the board of McDonald's or Arcos Dorados, the chairman of the board of a Marfrig are not involved, it takes a long time to get those things effected. You know, we touch 4 million people every day. We have 4 million customers coming through our doors every day. And we have, you know, the numbers that we manage are just enormous. We've impacted 425,000 kids with education. So it's not just about the protein. We also do water recuperation in our restaurants. We make sure that all of our products are well sourced. But I think one of the important things, the concepts that I'd also like to leave, besides the role of business in this issue, is the fact that you have to make progress over perfection. You know, many years ago, we wanted to launch in Brazil an organic salad. And the corporation said, well, you can't do that, because if you do that in Brazil, they're going to ask for it in France or in Germany, and we're not prepared to do it yet there. So, you know, a lot of times these companies, big companies that have a huge impact, they're slowed down by the fact that they feel that everything has to be perfect for it to be workable. And I think one of the concepts that we have to come through also is, look, it's progress over perfection. Let's take it step by step. The customer and the consumer is going to allow us that space, as long as they know that we're working on it and that we're working on it honestly, with transparency, and that we're moving ahead. So those are a couple of thoughts that I want to leave on the table, because you know, all these programs are great, but we have to have the customer understand that we're on their side and we're in their camp, and that it's hard work. So that's basically what I wanted to sort of lay out there for everybody.
Woods, thanks. We'll come back to some of those points that you're raising. Alejandro, it's up to you now.
Cindy, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and to be surrounded by these amazing individuals more than anything. So just to quickly introduce Cindy. Cindy was actually asked me to rephrase a little bit what Mutual Empathy is working on. Basically, Mutual Empathy is a venture studio focused on impact, really leveraging innovative finance principles, the latest technologies, and we really focused on creating and incubating companies that will be part of two main segments of the industry or of the global economy. We can speak about the circular economy, or road towards the energy transition. And then on the other hand, the creative economy, which is it's a pivotal economy, as it really reflects $2.5 trillion economy, which is the one generating more of a employment from the 15 to 29-year-olds. So that's our main focus. We focused also on funding, not only through monetary resources, but also through collaboration. Actually, Woods just mentioned something very interesting, which is from the different notes that I took from his intervention. He said we need each other. So that's basically, I think it's we're understanding that it's only through collaboration that we can make things happen. And I think that that's really reflected, I mean, institutionally, I would say in the social development goals from 1 to 17, probably one of the issues is that we're seeing them in a linear way rather than connected, where we see the social, environmental, and also the economic ones. And really, it's kind of that main aspect of collaboration which help us to put together. So that's where basically Mutual Empathy has been working on. Really kind of about why is this a good time for the private sector to kind of jump in and try to look for a transformation? Well, because the public sector is not alone on this, and we're seeing actually a huge. I like to think as what's happening at a macro level as well. I think we're going through a huge kind of a demographic opportunity where really it's the first time in history where actually the millennial generation is now more than the baby boomer generation. That comes with a huge kind of transition and impact in the entire economy and globally. And it's not only this millennial generation that's important now, but it's really kind of that centennial, that Gen Z generation, which is really kind of the key focus of the big governments and big corporations. So I think there's a huge opportunity there also because from a monetary perspective, if we were kind of to talk about economic indices, the millennials and centennials are receiving a transfer of more than $60 trillion of wealth. Only by those measures, I think it's just important to listen to those millennials. I'm actually kind of at the edge of that millennial generation. Very proudly actually, but it's not going to be as easy as my son Santiago, who's 3-year-old, and he's actually inheriting this world that we're talking about, ESG, which for me it's just the way things should work. We kind of try to. It's good to incorporate ESG and impact into the glossary of terms, but I think it's something that it's kind of our daily lives in a way. So demographically also, as I was saying, it's a huge opportunity also because of what we're seeing, this digital transformation, which is really kind of being driven by this new generation. And if we're looking and seeing that these 15 to 29-year-olds, according to UNESCO, the creative economy, it's the one that's creating most of the employment. Well, it's investing in the future. So that's from a macro level, kind of why we believe it's important. I think it's also to put into perspective as well. Actually, I was looking to the Economist, some of the capsules of information they shared. The International Energy Agency has kind of published a roadmap, and that roadmap for this energy transition that we're talking about is it's not looking for this energy transition, not only solar or wind, to be at a $2 trillion investment annually globally, but it has to be increased to $5 trillion. So what we're seeing is that we need to start talking in trillions, which I'm sure a lot of people can understand, but because that's actually how Woods was saying that the United States can be out of the woods in the pandemic because of the more than $10 trillion stimulus package they've been able to print. Not a country like Colombia, for example, unfortunately. But I would say, and the other probably macro theme or that really reflects all of us is that we just don't have time. It's really innovation has to be present. Unfortunately, I would say probably as it was configured or structured, governments are not here necessarily to innovate. I think the private sector can take a very important part of this. And as big corporates become some of the sizes of the governments, I think more boutique entrepreneurs and also kind of innovators need to jump in and try to just empower big corporations to help with this transition. We cannot. I mean, I'm very pleased to listen to Marfrig how such a monumental enterprise is able to innovate at that level and talk so broadly about issues about the Amazon, for example. So that's really kind of our main focus, I would say. And in terms of kind of, we just don't have time. I'll just stop with this one, and then I'll probably share some of the initiatives that I believe are ready to be implemented nowadays. And it's like instead of probably looking at Mars to colonize Mars in a way, I think we're more kind of I'm more in the boat of trying to decolonize our relationship with Earth in a way, and the people who have been able to protect it for millennia. We're seeing, and I'm also pleased that that Rosa Maria mentioned indigenous communities, because we're talking about individuals that an 8% of the population are protecting more than 80% of natural preserved areas. So I think we need to start looking into that. So in the energy transition, just kind of going back to seeing this kind of a reflection in terms of Alejandro, what is it interesting to share in terms of initiatives and companies that are that could help with this transition? I think energy transition is key. It's energy transition towards a circular economy. We've co-founded Value Skies, which is a company that develops projects to transform municipal solid waste, agricultural waste, and energy crops into sustainable aviation fuel and green chemistry. Sustainable aviation fuel, it's a great opportunity for the transport industry to decarbonize. As we know, airlines are going through a major challenge in terms of kind of being able to show results in this carbon neutrality, and sustainable aviation fuels is kind of a great opportunity here. We're building the first two plants in Latin America, in Medellin and in Cali. And I think that reflects some of the great opportunities and potentials that a region like ours can go through. We have a pipeline of some 10 projects, not only in Colombia, but in other parts of Latin America. In the same energy transition, there's a huge opportunity as well in green hydrogen. This has become a great focus for developed countries like the US, but also the European Union. Germany, as Marcelo was saying, is spending a lot of resources and a lot into this energy transition, and green hydrogen. It's a great opportunity. So we're focusing with mutual empathy on developing an 2,000 megas project in Colombia. So that's focused on green hydrogen. So green hydrogen, it's a major opportunity here. The other I would say main driver, as I mentioned, the creative economy. It's about also kind of this leveraging the latest technologies and to basically have a positive impact in regions and like the Amazon biome. Here we're talking about not necessarily AI in a way, as I believe in a way that AI, the way we're looking at it is more kind of alienating us from nature, right? Just looking at consumption-driven practices. In a way, I believe the potential with technology, as we get inspired by it, it's also on trying to get us closer to nature and trying to help us understand the intrinsic value of nature. And I think here we can solve some of the major problems in terms of how to fund conservation finance, not only reforestation and water, but also to fund to have a healthy ecosystem. About protecting also wildlife conservation. Here we have a great opportunity around gaming that we're working on with WWF, Siemens Stiftung, and some other partners, where we're looking to through gaming basically help to transition towards this cultural shift in education with Gaming for Good. I know the Wilson Center is also looking at a serious gaming initiative. So for us, gaming, it's an industry of around $200 billion, which becomes pretty relevant, and where industries like fashion are adopting gaming for this direct-to-consumer opportunity that's bringing. So here for us, gaming, it's kind of a way to work on learning through simulation, and we're actually the Centennial and Millennial population can actually, instead of us avoiding for them to get in contact with the screens all the time throughout the day, just try to embrace what's happening and basically help with this cultural shift that can help us accomplish that. We believe that that also here we can work around challenges around conservation, finance, and conservation of the wildlife that can mirror in a way this virtual and real world, and put into practice some of the challenges that the reward system from a gaming can work, but that can also be translated into a innovative finance vehicle like an outcome fund, and for those outcomes to be paid related and according to these challenges. So those are just some examples, and of course digital assets are part of the solution. As I sometimes we just feel in the impact space that we're stuck with this the monumental wealth to be managed only by a dozen of organizations, and I think digital assets can be part of the solution, as we're going to be able to bring SDG principles into those assets, which is happening as we speak, and also to bring transparency and blockchain power technologies into all of this. So that's just kind of a short summary. Cindy, thank you so much.
Great, Alejandro. I find every conversation with Alejandro just sort of expands your mind into things that you didn't even know existed. So anyway, let me ask a few questions of the panel, and once again invite people in the audience to submit questions that you might have via our Twitter account, which is at LATAMPROG, LATAMPROG, and we'll try to get to those later. I want to ask a first question based on something that both Woods and Marcelo touched on, which is Woods mentioned the notion of trust and the importance of the public trusting companies, because we've seen so many examples of times where companies did the wrong thing and hid toxic waste or the effects of their operations on populations. How do companies interact with the public to build that kind of trust? And that's, I guess, a question for all of you who would like to take that.
Cindy, let me take a first shot at it. And I'll just give you one example. This last pandemic, we started a thing when the pandemic hit last year called Mac Protegidos, where we showed people how to take care of themselves, washing their hands, social distancing. All of our restaurants, all the time, and we have almost 2,500 restaurants, we're always with all these things in place, right? These protocols. It is incredible how people trusted us to take care of them. And in so doing, they started trusting our food a lot more. And we also mentioned that we didn't fire anybody last year during the pandemic. Those two things that we did, of not firing anybody and of taking care of our employees and of taking care of our customers, had a huge impact on brand trust. Every consumer company wants brand trust. And so, if you do these things for the public and you do them for your employees, you get rewarded for it. And I think that's a little bit what you're asking. It's all about it's gaining trust through action, not just talking about it.
And if I may add a point here, Cindy, in Brazil, we created something called the Brazilian Coalition on Climate, Forest, and Agriculture. That coalition was formed right after a huge debate that divided the Brazilian society on the forest code. And we managed to bring together civil society, academia, and private sector into one alliance in order to make what we call a green land use economy possible. Now, we're now in 2021, and basically 6 years have passed since we did it. So the first round, we had individuals as facilitators, and I was one of them for a period. Then we decided that we should have co-facilitators with one from civil society, one from business. And we're now already in the second round of that formation. And the amount of trust that you build when you have processes in which, number one, it is very transparent and clear what you stand for. Number two, you ask the participants to take a stand, which means you don't only agree, but you formalize your agreement by signing on to a public statement. And number three, in the past, we used to think that everything needs to be decided by consensus. And I think this goes a little bit on what Woods explained about when you hamper innovation. Sometimes it is very difficult for companies to make a consensus on something because either they don't have a particular stake on this issue, so they rather not make a public statement about it, or some other times they may have some conflicts with it, and if they were to go through a due diligence, they wouldn't be able to speak about it anyway. And then we created this idea of the consent, which means you do not necessarily manifest yourself as approving it, but you don't obstruct that decision. And by building this process, we were able to move so much faster and so fast and so bold that today we have Marfrig, we have Suzano, we have Natura in this coalition making public statements that 3-4 years ago, you would not imagine that these companies were doing such a statement. In fact, one of the settings is that these companies went to the president of Brazil to say that they think Brazil should have good environmental legislation and not erode it, that Brazil should stop deforestation in the Amazon, that Brazil should provide vaccination to all Brazilians. So things that you would expect NGOs to subscribe for, now you see companies, NGOs, and academia doing it together. Now, as Wood said, it's a bold move that requires not only individual strength, but I think particularly requires boards to be there, because CEOs alone will not be able to make that move. You need the board. So I like to stress that on this ESG tsunami we're going through, a lot of people focus a lot on the E and on the S, rightfully so, but I want to bring the importance of the G on the ESG, because unless you have boards that are seriously committed to this and tell their C-level that this is where they want to go, this will not happen. And one final example of Marfrig that I want to give you, it's a very recent one. You know, now there is this fever of making the net zero commitment. It's 2050, 2040, 2035, and everybody's disputing who's going to do it faster, which is a good race, but it has to be true. It needs a plan that delivers it. And at Marfrig, we were having that conversation because there is a plan that says what should happen in 2020, 2021, 2023, and so on, to get to the eradication of deforestation and food traceability on board. And then at some point, the largest shareholder said, well, you know, as I'm not totally sure I'm going to be here in 2040 or 2050, I might as well make a safe move here. And he put his daughter in the sustainability committee. And she's very young, she's 18. So what will happen is in 2040, I'm not going to be there. The CEO is not going to be there. I don't know if he's going to be there, but she will. And she will remember what was the conversation in 2020 and in 2021 that we were having and why we need to make this happen. So I think it's very important for us to make two realizations here. One, G is very important, governance over this whole process. Number two, making commitments these days and announcing large, bold ambition far away is not enough. You need to show what you're doing tomorrow to get there. And then you need to address the big elephant in the room, which is the difference between neutralization and decarbonization. Decarbonization is our goal. Neutralization is what you do in order to get there. But if you try to use neutralization as a scapegoat to avoid decarbonation, then you're just doing greenwash. So managing companies like Woods does is not easy these days because we from civil society are always making their life more complex and calling for more ambition, but that's just because that's where the world is. And at the end of the day, that's what people want. Therefore is what the consumers want. And that's why it's worthwhile doing it.
Subtle thanks. Rosa Maria, please go ahead.
Thank you, Cindy. I believe that we can, of course, trust is the most important issue for a company. The company's trust, not only the product trust. And I believe that it's important to be sure that our employees, we are taking care of our employees. That's why we believe that having this program to eradicate multidimensional poverty in our employees is very important because we need to, they are our ambassadors everywhere in the communities, in different countries also. So we need to work together with them in order to be sure that they have the proper living standards that we are promoting as a company. And another thing that I believe is important is to work together with our competitors, because it's surprising for many people when we work with other companies of the beverage industry, when we have a common vision and a common goal, for example, water security, and working together with the competitors and with NGOs, with indigenous leaders and local authorities. I think it is a very, very important message for the society, and we start building trust not only in our company, but also in the collective actions that are very important to achieve important goals for the society and for the companies.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Alejandro, a question for you, which has to do, I mean, Woods was talking about, in essence, the perfect being the enemy of the good. In other words, if you can't have perfection, you should still try to do something, that the process is important. But my question has to do with the pace of change. I mean, we all know that there is this incredible urgency around keeping climate change or keeping the increase in temperatures below a certain level. But how do you see companies, societies adapting these really innovative strategies? And is it fast enough? Is it enough? How can things be scaled up?
Thank you, Cindy. That's a great question, and I was actually going to comment on those points. I feel let's go back a little bit on my financial sector days when I was on my probably last years at Morgan Stanley, New York. Back then, the team of Cristiana Figueres, which run Mission 2020. They were looking to understand how to engage the financial sector for a rapid transformation, and transformation essentially means mobilization of resources. What has just happened with COVID, that it's not really about inflation, it's about making things work, and then we can look at inflation. But for example, back then, a little bit the analysis when I was working for Morgan Stanley, they were basically raising funding for an impact investment fund, and they almost reached the total amount of AUM, assets under management, that they were looking at. However, it wasn't really kind of at the pace we were looking at. I was one of the people trying to help and with making this happen years ago. And when I spoke really with the team at Morgan Stanley, who were taking care of this part, they said, and here I go back to the demographics point that I commented initially, and they said, Alejandro, it's a great product. It's a great fund, as all of the other funds that are out there. However, that the average financial advisor at that point, they said it's a 65-year-old white male. And what basically meant in those points from that comment is that the gatekeepers, it's good to engage the board and the C-level, but the gatekeepers at the end need to have the metrics to make it happen. Otherwise, they'll just get complacent, and basically they have their lives. They need to bring food to the table. They have 2 to 3 children in their household, and they need to bring food to the table. So basically, looking at the gatekeepers, in this case, the financial advisors, bringing metrics, real metrics, environmental and social metrics, which I believe what's happening is that in what's happening with the corporate world is that the CEOs and the boards are getting these metrics, environmental and social metrics, but not really has it filtered towards the gatekeepers. And I think that's an essential part of the problem, because it's slow. It's a slow process that we're going through. I think it also has to be with the fact that I mentioned initially, that the fiat currencies like the dollar, they weren't structured in a way or created to provide environmental or social impact. They were meant to create wealth from economic perspective, from economic terms. Now, do we need to bring a transformation to that? Well, the answer is probably yes, and that's what's happening. That's why we're seeing gov coins, different sort of coins, making things a little bit faster. And I go back to basically the aspect about trust, and going back to that 8% of the individuals that protect more than 80% of biodiversity. Local economies, local indigenous economies are based on trust and exchange. That's what blockchain is. It's bringing trust and exchange into the equation. So, by the way, when we presented to indigenous communities with the Amazon Biome partners, what a potential, let's say, Amazon token was as a way of payment of goods and services that would connect individuals, consumers, and indigenous communities, they totally got it, indigenous communities leaders. We don't need sometimes to explain and go that far on explaining what trust is about, because they live with those principles. So I think it's us who are a little bit behind on bringing a lot of science is essential, but I think we need to try to understand a little bit better what is this trust about, and how can we make things work faster. And I'll end up by saying this, and I must say that sometimes I'm quite disappointed about the role of development banks. They haven't come up really with their name of development. I think they need to be restructured in a way, because their governance, the G, it's not working. It's not working because it's essentially development banks should be here to fund really innovation and technology that actually hasn't been proven, not technology that's already selling at a commercial pace. So I think there's a huge aspect here about, again, what Marcelo was saying about the governance that we need to look at.
I have one last question for all of you, and I'm going to have Rosa Maria go first because I know she has to leave for another commitment. It's really, it's how the private sector talks, how companies talk with one another, whether within your particular industry or more broadly in your society. Because not all of the private sector in any country of the world really is not only talking the talk, but walking the walk. I mean, not just doing, saying the right things, but doing the right things. So Rosa Maria, in the context, let's just say of Guatemala, and I know you're active in Ecuador and Peru and other places, but in the context of Guatemala, what is your conversation with other companies that are not yet as far along as CBC is?
Well, it is very important, first of all, to share a common vision and a common ambition, because sometimes if we don't have the point of view of what our problems are and we can solve the problems together, I think that this is a very important step that we need to do together, because sometimes we understand the problems in different, we have different points of view and we have different types of solutions. So first of all, I believe that it is important to have like a round table where we can have this kind of discussion. As I mentioned before, I believe that it is very good example, not only for international companies, but for local companies. But when we competitors can work together in the water security, for example, in the circular economy, because it sends a message for the rest of the companies and the rest of the society that we can come together to think and not only to make an assessment of the problems, to have a common vision, but most important of all is to have a round table when we can discuss our ideas, and we all have the opportunity to put the ideas on the table, not only the companies, but also the NGOs, the local authorities, the indigenous leaders. If we have this kind of communication, and sometimes, for example, in Guatemala, in order to have a better level of trust with indigenous leaders, you have to understand their point of view of the mother nature, and you have to participate with them in a specific dialogue with the nature. And for example, we had the opportunity to participate in the Mayan ceremony of fire, where you have this common discussion about the problems, the solutions, and we go together to this ceremony to ask the earth for permission to continue working together in a project. And I believe that it is very important to understand, to have the time to have this kind of conversation and this have of common experience, that if we don't have the opportunity to live, maybe we are not going to understand a specific point of view. I think is to be around the table, like being around the fire, and try to understand each other, and try to have a lecture of the fire, and try to have a lecture of the nature also, and the people around this table, with a very important, for me, is to have of being humilde, so you can really appreciate what other people think are their ideas, and this I believe this is the most important step of working together with, not only with our companies. I mean, we have to think about work together as a society with different sectors.
Thank you so much, and please feel free to jump off and go to your other
Thank
meeting.
you.
But it's
Thank
a
you
pleasure
very
to
much.
have you, really.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
joining us. Woods, if you could go next and just talk about, I mean, obviously, Rosa Maria was just talking about the need to dialogue, not just with other companies, but with other organizations in civil society, especially important in a country like Guatemala, where there are such profound ethnic divisions. But within the private sector itself, do you get a sense that these principles of ESG are really being embraced in the kind of fundamental way that you and Marcelo have been talking about, or is it still kind of an uphill battle, you know, in the sort of networks that you're part of?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, we have the luxury of working with a company like Marfrig, for instance, that is very interested in this kind of stuff. So, you know, that's been easy. We're also working with Coca-Cola. They're our supplier, and that also is an easy relationship because they have the same thoughts that we do. When you get into other areas, it becomes more complicated. But everybody, I mean, to go to something Alejandro said before, which I thought was very interesting, is I don't remember what you used, the word, Alejandro. You said, look, if some law comes along or some regulation comes along, we won't go against it. We'll go along with it, right? We're doing that. So now with single-use plastics, which is coming down the pike, it's been coming down the pike for a while. We decided a couple of years ago to say, all right, we're going to take the lids and the straws away from our beverages, except what goes to the drive-thru. We've saved, I don't know, I think about 6,000 tons a year just by doing that of plastic. And so that was something that we did, and we just stepped back. So we're not going to fight this. And I think now our competitors, to your point before, are doing the same thing. Working with our competitors in Mexico and now Uruguay, what we've done is, look, we have all this oil that gets used and it's old, right? So we have to pick it up. That oil can be filtered and used for biofuel. So that we now have our distributor, our logistics distributor, picking up our oil, and they're also picking up Kentucky Fried Chicken's oil and other people, because, you know, when you have restaurants, they're always normally next to each other. So that's something of cooperation as well. So I think you're getting there, and I think you're going to get there more as you go down the road. There's going to be more collaboration, I think, between the private sector and the public sector, because the public sector, the governments, you know, I think I said it before, people come to meet companies because they don't think that the governments have done the right job, so they look to us to fix it. And that's like 60 or 70% of the people think that. So that puts a huge onus on us. And a lot of times what governments do in Latin America especially, is they get something that was brought out in France after a lot of study, and it was designed for France, like some kinds of, you know, single-use plastics, and they try to inject it into Latin America without looking at all the ramifications. You know, a lot of policy has to be executed properly. And I think it's an execution that there has to be more of a marriage between the public sector and the private sector. So I think today, to answer your question, Cindy, in a roundabout way, I think today in many countries, there's a lot of mistrust between the private sector and the governments. And we need to bridge that gap. And I think one of the ways we can bridge that gap is by doing things around ESG, because it's in all of our interest. So that might be a good excuse to get more trust going between the consumer and companies, and between consumer and the public sector, and consumer and then public sector and private sector.
Thanks very much, Alejandro, and we'll finish with Marcelo.
Yes, I think it's I'll probably what has been shared really about kind of that trust is essential. right? And one of the things, another company which was actually created in the pandemic, it was a call from the Ethical Fashion Initiative. It's a UN and International Trade Center initiative. It's called where they asked us to transform the fashion industry as being one of the highest pollutant or CO2 emissions in the world. We're talking that the fashion industry generates more than 10% of CO2 emissions, and if the pace continues, it will in 2030 it will continue growing by 50%. So this is kind of a huge industry which actually connects our daily lives. So we were asked to upon a 600 people participant to be part of this hackathon, and three startups were selected. One of them was ours with my partner in Milan, in Italy. I actually haven't met her, so digital works in a way. We created this company. It's called Neutral Loop, and basically what it does, it basically engages with the two main stakeholders of the lifestyle and fashion industry, which are the brands and the consumers, right? I think engaging with the consumer is essential, as all the participants here have mentioned. And what it does is because the consumer, that 70% that the consumers expect for companies to make a change, kind of that quote from Woods, it's totally right. And actually, and if we incorporate that these consumers, we have a big percentage millennial and centennial. If the consumer is engaged and is empowered, and if it's there to raise its hand and be part of the solution, I think that's essential. So what we created is basically as simple as a plugin that you can include at the checkout process when you're buying from a fashion brand, from a Gucci, whatever it is. And then basically we allow the brand to compensate for their CO2 emissions. So basically the brand is basically able to show, not internally, but also to the consumers, that they have compensated their CO2 emissions of that purchase. So, but then probably the most important aspect, because now carbon credits and this neutrality is part of the answer, but it's not really the answer, because it's not getting into this kind of investment at a corporate level. But what we allow is we select from top strategic partners like Aspen Institute, Instituto, etc. We select a pipeline of projects aligned with the fashion industry, aligned with impact, and we allow the consumer to donate $1, $3, $5 to mobilize resources towards these projects. The good thing here is that you're creating a sense of community around the consumer, that it is possible to be part of the change. And while doing that, you also engage with the brands and show them, you know what, this is consumer loyalty if you're able to engage with those consumers in that sense. So in a way, it can be replicated towards other industries, food, airlines, etc., because it's a matter of aligning these impact projects with those industries and allowing the consumers to put $1, $3, $5, whatever that is, and it becomes kind of a huge potential opportunity, even from a fintech perspective, because you're allowing the mobilization of resources towards these different type of projects.
Great, Alejandro, thanks. Marcelo, more generally, how is Marfrig modeling all of this within Brazilian society, not just within the beef industry, as important as it is, and given the multiple impacts, but across, say, other sectors of the Brazilian economy?
Well, I would say that Marfrig is on the eye of the storm because it operates in the Amazon, and I think that it's a company that also lived the situation where it made promises that it did not deliver. So what do you do with trust when that happens? And I think then comes a very important word, which is transparency. And I think that one of the very important pillars of the commitment made last year of full traceability, using blockchain, by the way, Alejandro, as a tool, is to not only build that traceability, but make that transparency available to anyone and everyone that wants to see it. And I think that this is a new, it was at the time a very unique statement of a corporation making itself open and transparent to what it's doing and what it's not doing. So I think this is a very important element that later you will see that many other companies in Brazil engaged in similar pathways from different sectors like pulp and paper and others, because as Woods was saying, the consumer today wants trust, but before you build trust, you need to deserve it. And in order to prove that you deserve it, you need to be transparent. You don't necessarily need to get it right all the time, because actually, if you are also very open about what are the problems you're facing and the limitations you're facing, that's equally, in my opinion, valued by consumers and by the general society. Having said that, I think that another very important point for us to think about here is how important it is for the private sector and for companies to understand that while they are very powerful, they own their license of operation to society. And they should never forget that. And I can give you a very clear example. Very recently, and the Wilson Center was very involved on that, President Biden was in promoting the climate summit, looking at striking a deal with the Brazilian government to curb deforestation. And they engaged in a bilateral negotiation. And everybody else in Brazil were saying, the terms of this conversation is wrong. Why is it wrong? Because to make a deal about deforestation in Brazil, you should not engage only with the federal level. You need to have the subnational level. You need to have private sector. You need to have academia. You need to have civil society. And most important, you need to have indigenous peoples involved at the negotiation table. Yes, we all agree that Brazil deserves and should have investment to keep a standing forest and a bioeconomy lively, but it should be money comes in after results are proven, are delivered. And at that time, as you may recall, Minister of Environment Salles was saying, give me $1 billion and give me a few months, and I'll show you a 40% reduction, just like that. So interesting enough, Cindy, we had at that point, private sector, academia, civil society, and indigenous peoples against the deal, saying this is a bad deal. Don't do it, President Biden. If you read the New York Times, the highlight is 8 American senators wrote to President Biden saying, don't do it. And actually, President Biden stepped out of it. You could say it's because of the US Senate, but you know what? The mobilization to get those 8 senators to do what they did came from indigenous peoples in the Amazon biome that then activated civil society, that then activated the Congress, that then activated private sector, that then came to the US Senate. So I think companies are now, at least the ones that are understanding the new world, they understand the value of multi-stakeholder partnerships. They understand the value of transparency. And they understand that by just following that pathway is the way you build trust. And by building trust, you can build a future.
Great. Thank you so much, Marcelo, Woods, Alejandro, Rosa Maria, for this very fascinating conversation. I hope to have more. What you're doing within your own companies is extraordinarily important. We look forward to continuing to engage with you and on these issues. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Alejandro. Woods.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you all. Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you, Woods.